Hello and welcome to Smaulgld's People's Bank of China's Gold Reserve Update. For the month of November 2017, the People's Bank of China reported flat gold reserves again in November 2017, as they added no gold to the reserves. And this is now a trend. People's Bank of China has reported adding no gold to the reserves since October 2016, and that coincidentally or intentionally was the month that China was officially added to the SDR basket at the IMF. Total reported People's Bank of China's gold reserves stand at 1,842.6 tons, the same as October 2016. However, People's Bank of China's foreign reserves have grown now for the 10th month in a row, up another $11 billion in November to $3.11 trillion. They had dipped earlier below $3 trillion. At one point, they were over $4 trillion. As we saw, the People's Bank of China's foreign reserves had fallen $320 billion in 2016 and $513 billion in 2015. So they're steadily adding back their reserves and stemming capital outflows. Now, the People's Bank of China had been adding gold steadily to reserves since they started reporting again in June of 2015, but they abruptly halted adding or reporting adding gold to the reserves in October 2016. Now, the value of China's gold at the end of November, that those 1,842 tons, it's about $75–80 billion. Not a lot of notional dollar amount in the grand scheme of things when they have $3.11 trillion in other reserves. Most of them are US dollar reserves. Let's take a look now at some charts and some updates on China and gold. You can see I didn't update the chart this month, wasn't worth it, it's just another flat line, but you could see that China had not reported gold reserves from 2009 to 2015, and they were stuck at 1,054. Then in June 2015, or actually in July 2015, they reported their June 2015 gold reserves, and they jumped up to about 1,600 tons. And then since then, they did add reserves monthly, or reported adding reserves monthly up till October 2016. And then since then, they flatlined through 1,842 tons. If you stop running once you catch the bus, the People's Bank of China hasn't added gold to reserves since the yuan was added to the SDR basket in October 2016. Now, this leads everyone to ask or to insist that China is lying, or this is some type of Sun Tzu deception game. Well, maybe it's none of those. It's just that there is gold in China. It's obvious there's a lot of gold in China. They mine 450 tons a year of gold. They don't export any of that. They import over 5. There's a lot of gold in China. There's no two ways about it. And if you just take the imports into China and the gold that they produced over the past 5–10 years, you get far more than 1,842 tons on the People's Bank of China's balance sheet. That just means to me, not that the People's Bank of China is a lying or a Sun Tzu type entity. It's just that they have the gold elsewhere in the country. There's no particular genius required for that, either on the part of the Chinese or the part of anyone trying to figure that out. There's gold at other government-owned banks, some of them directly owned by the People's Bank of China in the structure. Some are partially owned. But in any event, since you're dealing with a state-run, government-owned of all assets, because it's a communist country, that gold doesn't have to be sitting on the balance sheet of the People's Bank of China. So it's far better, instead of to speculate about some grand Chinese plan for gold back this or that, is just really to follow the gold flows. And we'll take a look at some charts of gold production in China, gold imports, and then the gold numbers that we see on retail trade in China, and also the Shanghai Gold Exchange numbers. So let's take a look at those charts. And we can see, first, here's the foreign reserves. You can see how through trade, basically foreign trade, China accumulated a lot of foreign reserves, and then they sold them down for the last couple of years to defend the yuan, and then boom, they've been adding them back the last 11 months, although not at quite the same pace that they had added them the prior 6-7 years. But they're now, you can see, are past that demarcation line of $3 trillion. Now, treasuries, when a country adds reserves, no matter what that country is, no matter what their de-dollarization position is, U.S. Treasury reserves are the #1 held asset, and China's no different. And China has added back during those 11 months of increasing their foreign reserves. Most of that has been in the form of dollar-denominated assets or U.S. Treasuries. And you can see they're back up to about 1.2 trillion, having gone as low as under 1.1 trillion. And at one point earlier this year, Japan had overtaken China as the #1 foreign holder of U.S. Treasuries, but that has now stopped, and China has signaled that they're ready to buy more Treasuries as the yuan stabilizes. And you see Russia's doing the same. Russia's U.S. Treasury position had hit its nadir in, I think that's April 2015, in the midst of sanctions. Even though Russia is still under sanctions, still has tensions with the United States, they too are building their foreign reserves. They are adding gold every month. They had a record year this year, adding 215 tons through November, and that's worth about 75-80 billion, their total gold reserves, just like China's. But they have more in U.S. dollars. Even though they are increasing their gold reserves, the dollar reserves are still larger at, I was going to say the Soviet Union, but in Russia. Now, let's take a look at Chinese gold imports through Hong Kong. This is just Hong Kong. Now, if you want to play Sun Tzu, it could be that China imports more gold, and they probably do, through Shanghai. They don't report that, but they do report or Hong Kong reports it. So they report how much gold goes into China. And this year it's down a bit, but still, it's about 560 tons through November. And you can see over the past, 15, 16 years or so, they've imported 5,500 tons. Now, some of that goes to the Shanghai Gold Exchange, but maybe some of that goes to the People's Bank of China. But clearly, that's 5,500 tons. That's far more than the 1,842 tons that the People's Bank of China mentions. And then here you have Chinese gold mining production, and there's another 5,200 tons that are produced in China, not exported. So you got between imports into Hong Kong and China well over 10,000 tons. And this gold, not all of it ends up at the People's Bank of China. And again, some of it ends up here at the Shanghai Gold Exchange, where traders trade and gets withdrawn, doesn't leave the country. But this year, it looks like it's going to be one of the top years again. This is through November. 1,845 tons of gold have been withdrawn, which is larger than the amount of gold that the People's Bank of China has. Now let's take a look at where China stands. It looks like Russia's going to pass them if China doesn't report any gold in the next couple of months, and Russia continues its gold buying binge. And again, Russia's the same thing. Russia gets its gold from gold mining production. It's the second or third largest gold mining producing country in the world, and it adds its gold to reserves, effectively turning those rubles into gold. But it looks like they are going to surpass China unless China decides 2018 is the year where they start piling on the gold. Now, everyone likes to say that China's got gold, they're preparing, they know it's coming, dollar collapse. Actually, the yuan is more vulnerable to a collapse than the dollar, as we like to point out each and every week. China is far more addicted to debt, has added more debt more quickly than any nation on earth, and in fact, in the last 5 years, has added more debt than the entire world combined. That's where a lot of the growth comes from. It is debt-driven. Here's a chart. You want to take a look at it. How much gold that China has, including the People's Bank of China, the 1,842 tons. That's really, as we mentioned, only worth about $75-80 billion. Well, they have debt over 28, some say $50 trillion, and that doesn't include unfunded liabilities, and that's only debt denominated in Chinese yuan. We just saw recently that China's foreign debt is finally starting to tick up. They're now at 1.68 trillion. That's up 7.5% in a quarter. So much for the China has no foreign debt narrative. So China is indeed a debt monster, far in excess of the fact that they may be also a prodigious gold hoarder. They are nowhere near hoarding as much gold as they might need to, quote, protect themselves against any debt collapse. And that debt collapse would more likely come from China than the United States. I know that's not what the gold bugs like to tell you. They keep telling you unsustainable U.S. debt. That may be true, but at least there's foreign demand for U.S. debt. There is relatively little foreign demand for Chinese yuan debt, and China is just lending more and more money to itself, bailing itself out. And of course, that makes it difficult for the yuan to become an international currency where it then can borrow money foreign. But they're making some headway into that. But it's hard to think of China as just as some type of golden paradise where they hoard gold and they're into sound money. And that's just not the case. And in fact, they're not even reporting any gold. So either they are liars, as some people like to say, or they're playing some Sun Tzu strategy game, or that's just how they prudently manage their foreign reserves, or try to manage their foreign reserves. And there's only so much gold can do for a country. Thank you very much for listening.